Dr. Ben Harper had been working on Nightfall Station for 8 months, long enough to appreciate the unique challenges of studying nocturnal ecosystems in perpetual darkness, but not quite long enough to stop being fascinated by his Nix-High research partner. Sarah moved through the biolab with fluid grace that made Ben think of predators and dancers in equal measure, her pointed ears tracking sounds he couldn't hear while her pale, luminescent skin seemed to gather the lab's dim lighting and reflect it back like captured starlight. The phosphorescent readings are inconsistent with our earlier samples, Sarah said, her voice carrying the musical quality that marked all Nix-High speech. The bioluminescent organisms are responding to something we haven't identified. Ben looked up from his microscope, rubbing eyes that were tired from squinting at specimens in the station's perpetually dim lighting. Nightfall Station operated on a reduced illumination schedule to accommodate the Nix-High consultants, and while Ben had grown accustomed to working in what amounted to twilight conditions, long research sessions still left him feeling drained. Could be a chemical gradient we're missing, he suggested, moving to stand beside Sarah at the analysis station. The native organisms might be reacting to trace elements that our equipment isn't calibrated to detect. Sarah nodded, her silver hair catching the red glow of the emergency lighting strips that provided most of the lab's illumination. Ben had learned that the Nix-High preferred environments that reminded him of vampire movies from Earth's ancient entertainment archives, though Sarah had explained that her people's reputation for blood drinking was largely mythological. The Nix-High fed on life energy rather than blood, a process that was apparently far more sophisticated and less grotesque than human folklore suggested. I could analyze the samples using enhanced perception, Sarah offered, though Ben noticed the slight hesitation in her voice. My people's sensory capabilities extend beyond the normal electromagnetic spectrum. Ben had seen demonstrations of Nix-High enhanced senses before, and they never failed to impress him. Sarah could detect chemical compositions by scent, track thermal variations that were invisible to human instruments, and apparently sense bioelectric fields with enough precision to monitor his heart rate from across the room. That would be helpful, Ben said, trying not to think about how close she would need to stand to perform the analysis. I'll prepare the sample array. Working alongside Sarah had become both the best and most frustrating part of Ben's assignment on Nightfall Station. She was brilliant, insightful, and possessed knowledge of xenobiology that surpassed most experts in the field. She was also beautiful in an otherworldly way that made Ben acutely aware of every moment they spent in close proximity. The problem was that Ben had no idea how to read Nix-High social cues, and Sarah's alien nature made it impossible to know whether her occasional smiles and the way she sometimes stood closer than strictly necessary meant anything beyond professional courtesy. The primary containment field is fluctuating, Sarah said, moving to the equipment panel with quick, economical movements. We should transfer the samples to secondary storage before we lose environmental stability. Ben joined her at the control station, trying to diagnose the equipment failure while acutely aware of Sarah's presence beside him. Her scent reminded him of night-blooming flowers and ozone, distinctive but not unpleasant, and he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin despite the Nix-High's typically lower body temperature. The backup generators are struggling, Ben said, studying the power consumption readings. We might need to work faster than planned. As if summoned by his words, the lab's main lighting failed completely, leaving them in the crimson glow of emergency strips that painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. Ben heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of her enhanced senses engaging, a subtle shift in her breathing that indicated she was processing sensory information beyond human perception. I can guide us to the emergency storage, Sarah said, her voice taking on an authoritative tone that reminded Ben of her predatory nature. But you'll need to trust me completely. Ben felt her hand close around his wrist, her grip firm but careful, as if she was conscious of her enhanced strength. In the near-total darkness, her touch became his anchor to safety, and he found himself trusting her guidance with an ease that surprised him. This way, Sarah murmured, leading him through the maze of equipment and workstations with the confidence of someone who could see perfectly in conditions that left Ben effectively blind. They moved through the darkened lab like dancers performing a routine they'd practiced for years, Sarah's enhanced senses allowing her to navigate obstacles while Ben followed her lead with growing admiration for her capabilities. When they reached the emergency storage unit, Ben felt a rush of relief that had nothing to do with equipment safety and everything to do with the realization that he trusted Sarah more completely than he'd trusted anyone in years. "Thank you," he said as she activated the storage unit's independent power supply, bringing blessed illumination back to their immediate area. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Sarah turned to face him in the restored lighting, and Ben was struck by how the experience had changed her expression. Where before she had maintained the professional distance that characterized their working relationship, now she looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Ben," she said quietly, and the way she spoke his name sent warmth through his chest that he hadn't expected. Looking at her in the soft glow of the emergency lighting, seeing the way her crimson eyes reflected concern and something deeper, Ben felt words rising to his lips before his brain could stop them. "I love you," he said, the declaration escaping as part joke and part truth, meant to break the tension of the moment with humor. The effect was immediate and electric. Sarah went completely still, her entire body tensing as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her crimson eyes began to glow with an inner fire that Ben had never seen before, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. "Then you're mine," she said, and Ben realized with growing alarm that his casual joke had just triggered something profound and irreversible in the alien woman standing before him. Ben stared at Sarah in the emergency lighting, watching as her entire demeanor transformed before his eyes. The professional consultant he'd been working with for months was being replaced by something primal and possessive, her crimson eyes blazing with an intensity that made his survival instincts scream warnings. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I was joking. You know, trying to lighten the mood after the power failure. Jokes are not a concept that translates well when discussing matters of the heart," Sarah replied, her voice carrying undertones that Ben had never heard before. "Among my people, declarations of love create bonds that transcend casual intention." Ben felt his stomach drop as the implications began to sink in. "What kind of bonds?" Sarah moved closer, and Ben noticed that her movements had become more fluid, more predatory, as if his words had awakened something that had been carefully controlled during their previous interactions. "The Nixai do not speak of love lightly," she explained. "When such words are uttered with genuine emotion, and yours carried emotional resonance despite your conscious intent, they initiate the mating bond." "Mating bond?" Ben's voice cracked slightly on the words. "A psychic connection that links two individuals at the level of life force itself," Sarah said, circling him slowly in a way that reminded Ben uncomfortably of a predator evaluating prey. "It begins with the declaration and must be completed through mutual acceptance or formally rejected within one planetary cycle." Ben could feel his scientific mind trying to process the information while his emotional awareness reeled from the implications. "And if it's not completed or rejected?" Sarah's expression grew troubled. "Incomplete bonds can drive Nixai to madness. The psychic energy builds without release, creating instabilities that affect both parties." As if to demonstrate her point, Ben felt a sudden warmth in his chest, a sensation like sunlight spreading through his bloodstream that seemed to originate from Sarah's proximity. When she moved away, the feeling dimmed, and when she stepped closer, it intensified. "I'm already feeling it," he said with growing alarm. "Whatever this bond thing is, it's already affecting me." "Because your declaration was genuine," Sarah replied. "Your conscious mind intended humor, but your subconscious supplied emotional truth. The bond responds to authentic feeling, not surface intention." Ben ran his hands through his hair, trying to understand how a simple joke had escalated into what sounded like alien marriage with psychic side effects. "Okay, let's say I believe this is really happening. What are my options?" "Completion or rejection," Sarah said simply. "If you complete the bond, we become permanent mates, sharing life force and emotional connection across any distance. If you reject it, the psychic energy dissipates harmlessly for you, but I must find another outlet for the accumulated bond energy or face psychological deterioration." "Another outlet?" "Another mate," Sarah clarified. "Within the same planetary cycle, or the incomplete bond causes severe mental instability." Ben studied her face, seeing past the alien features to the woman he'd been working beside for months. "And what do you want? Do you have any choice in this, or are you just stuck with whatever I decide?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I have been interested in you for some time," she admitted. "Your intelligence, your dedication to your research, the way you treat me as a colleague rather than a curiosity. When you spoke of love, even in jest, it awakened feelings I had been suppressing." "Why suppressing them?" "Because Nix-High bonds are permanent and profound. We do not form casual relationships or temporary attractions. To love someone is to claim them utterly, to make them part of yourself in ways that transcend human understanding of partnership." Ben felt the warmth in his chest pulse stronger, and he realized that Sarah's proximity was becoming not just noticeable but necessary. The thought of her leaving the lab made him feel physically uncomfortable, as if part of his own life force was tied to her presence. "This is happening fast," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was complaining or simply observing. "The bond accelerates once initiated," Sarah agreed. "Your human biochemistry is adapting to Nix-High psychic frequencies more quickly than I expected." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Lisa Park, the station's head administrator, who entered the bio-lab with the brisk efficiency of someone dealing with yet another equipment crisis. "Ben, we heard about the power failure. Are you and the consultant all right?" "Dar?" Park asked, then stopped short when she saw Sarah's transformed appearance. "Is everything okay? You both look different," Ben finished, realizing that whatever changes the bond was creating were probably visible to outside observers. Sarah had indeed changed. Her skin had taken on a more pronounced luminescence, her eyes glowed with that inner fire even in normal lighting, and she moved with a predatory grace that made her seem larger and more dangerous than before. Most noticeably, she had positioned herself between Ben and Dr. Park in a stance that was unmistakably protective. "The consultant appears to be exhibiting enhanced territorial behaviors," Dr. Park observed clinically. "Ben, has there been some kind of incident?" "You could say that," Ben replied, watching as Sarah's eyes tracked Dr. Park's every movement with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat. "We seem to have accidentally triggered some kind of Nix-High cultural protocol." "Dar?" Park's expression grew concerned. "What kind of protocol?" Before Ben could answer, Sarah spoke, her voice carrying an edge that made both humans step back involuntarily. "The human Ben has initiated mating bond procedures. I am now his designated mate, and he is under my protection until the bond is completed or formally dissolved." Dr. Park blinked in surprise. "Ben, did you propose to the alien consultant?" "I said, 'I love you,' as a joke," Ben admitted, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "Apparently that has much more serious implications in Nix-High culture than I realized." "A joke?" Dr. Park's scientific curiosity was clearly warring with her administrative concerns. "And this triggered some kind of automatic bonding response?" "The Nix-High do not joke about matters of emotional significance," Sarah said, her tone suggesting that human humor was a character flaw she was prepared to overlook. "Ben's declaration was received and accepted according to the traditions of my people." Dr. Park looked between them, clearly trying to process the implications. "Ben, do you understand what you've gotten yourself into?" Ben glanced at Sarah, who was watching him with an expression that mixed hope, concern, and barely controlled predatory intensity. The warmth in his chest pulsed stronger, and he realized that the idea of rejecting the bond was becoming increasingly difficult to contemplate. "I'm beginning to," he said quietly, "and I'm not sure I want to get myself out of it." The situation escalated dramatically when 3 Nix-High ships docked with Nightfall Station the following day, their arrival triggering alerts throughout the facility as sensors detected energy signatures unlike anything in the standard alien vessel database. Ben watched through the observation deck as sleek, predatory craft settled into the docking bays with movements that reminded him of hunting birds folding their wings. "Family," Sarah said grimly as she joined him at the viewport, her enhanced senses apparently able to identify the newcomers before the docking procedures were complete. "My brother Kale, and probably half the clan council." How did they know to come here? Ben asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Bonding pheromones, Sarah replied, unconsciously moving closer to him in a way that had become habitual over the past day. When a Nix-High initiates the mating sequence, it creates biochemical signals that can be detected across several star systems by family members. Ben had been learning about Nix-High biology and culture through crash courses that left his head spinning, but this was new information. You're saying that your people can smell our relationship from light years away? In simplified terms, yes, Sarah said. The incomplete bond creates chemical instabilities that signal distress to other Nix-High. They've come to investigate. The implications were troubling. Ben had spent the past 24 hours adapting to physical and emotional changes that he was still struggling to understand, the constant awareness of Sarah's presence, the way his energy levels seemed tied to her proximity, the protective instincts that flared whenever other humans got too close to her. Now he was about to meet alien relatives who could literally smell his romantic entanglements. What will they want? Ben asked. To determine whether you're worthy of completing the bond or whether I need to be rescued from an incomplete mating that's affecting my psychological stability, Sarah replied with the clinical detachment she used when discussing particularly complex research data. And if they decide I'm not worthy? Sarah's crimson eyes met his with an intensity that made the bond energy pull stronger between them. Then they'll kill you and find me a more suitable mate from among our own people. Ben felt his blood chill. You're joking. Nix-High do not joke about matters of clan honor or genetic compatibility, Sarah said seriously. If they determine that your bonding with me was the result of manipulation or cultural ignorance, they will consider it an assault on my autonomy. The docking bay chimed with the announcement of incoming passengers, and Ben could feel Sarah's tension increase dramatically. Her breathing shifted to the enhanced pattern he'd learned indicated predatory alertness, and her skin took on a more pronounced luminescence that made her look otherworldly even by Nix-High standards. Sarah, came a voice from the docking bay entrance, speaking in the musical language of the Nix-High that Ben's universal translator struggled to parse. Sister, we felt your distress across the void. The Nix-High who entered was clearly related to Sarah, the same pointed ears, the same luminescent skin, the same predatory grace. But where Sarah moved with controlled elegance, this newcomer radiated barely contained violence. He was taller than Sarah by half a foot, his silver hair was longer and elaborately braided, and his crimson eyes held an intensity that made Ben's survival instinct scream warnings. Kale, Sarah replied in standard, clearly for Ben's benefit. I am not in distress. I am bonding. Kale's gaze shifted to Ben with the kind of assessment usually reserved for laboratory specimens or potential prey. This is the human who has entrapped you. This is Ben Harper, xenobiologist and my research partner, Sarah corrected firmly. He initiated bonding through genuine emotional declaration, not entrapment. Two more Nix-High entered behind Kale, both carrying themselves with the authority of clan leadership. Ben realized he was facing something equivalent to a supernatural parole board, where the wrong answer could result in immediate execution. Dr. Harper, Kale said, his standard accented but precise, you will explain the circumstances that led to this irregular bonding. Ben glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, then faced the alien delegation with as much dignity as he could muster. I made an emotional declaration without understanding its cultural significance to your people. It was spontaneous and genuine, but not intended as a formal bonding request. You spoke of love to my sister without comprehending the consequences. Kale's voice carried dangerous undertones. I spoke of love because I felt it, Ben corrected, surprised by his own boldness. The consequences are what I'm trying to understand now. One of the other Nix-High, an older female with elaborate ceremonial scarification, stepped forward. I am Elder Vex of the Clan Council. Human, do you understand that Nix-High bonds are permanent and absolute? That completing this union will fundamentally alter your existence. I'm beginning to understand that, Ben replied. But I'm also beginning to understand that the alternative, rejecting the bond, would cause Sarah psychological harm that I'm not willing to be responsible for. Even if completing the bond means abandoning your human life and society? Elder Vex pressed. Ben felt the warmth in his chest pulse stronger as he looked at Sarah, seeing the hope and fear warring in her expression. Elder Vex, I've spent my entire adult life studying alien species and trying to understand how different forms of consciousness can coexist. The idea of literally sharing consciousness with someone I care about isn't terrifying, it's the most fascinating research opportunity I've ever encountered. Kale's expression shifted slightly, suggesting Ben's answer had been unexpected. You view bonding as an intellectual exercise? I view bonding as evolution, Ben corrected. The chance to become something more than either of us could be alone. Sarah stepped closer to Ben, her protective instincts clearly engaged despite the fact that these were her own family members. Kale, he has shown no fear of my nature, no revulsion at Nick's high feeding practices, no concern about the social implications of interspecies bonding. His acceptance has been complete from the moment he understood what was happening. Complete acceptance from someone who stumbled into bonding by accident? Elder Vex's skepticism was evident. Complete acceptance from someone who has spent months working beside me, learning my capabilities, respecting my culture, and treating me as an equal colleague rather than an exotic curiosity, Sarah replied. The bonding may have been initiated accidentally, but Ben's worthiness has been demonstrated through consistent behavior. Ben felt a surge of gratitude toward Sarah for her defense, followed immediately by the realization that she was fighting for their relationship against her own family. The protective instincts that had been growing stronger since the bond initiated flared into something approaching fury. With respect, Elder Vex, Ben said, his voice carrying an edge that surprised everyone including himself, Sarah is not property to be claimed or protected against her own choices. She's an intelligent, autonomous individual who has the right to choose her own mate regardless of species or cultural conventions. The silence that followed Ben's declaration was so profound that he could hear the station's environmental systems humming in the background. All three Nix High visitors stared at him with expressions that ranged from shock to what might have been approval. Interesting, Elder Vex said finally. The human defends not just his own interests, but Sarah's autonomy. This suggests bonding compatibility beyond simple physical attraction. Kale nodded slowly. Sister, has the human demonstrated protective behaviors toward you? Constantly, Sarah replied. He positions himself between me and perceived threats, monitors my well-being during research activities, and has modified his own schedule to accommodate my feeding requirements. The bond has awakened proper mate behaviors in both of us. Elder Vex and Kale exchanged meaningful looks before the elder spoke again. Dar. Harper, are you prepared to undergo the bonding ceremony with full knowledge of its permanent nature and life-altering consequences? Ben looked at Sarah, seeing in her crimson eyes not just the alien consultant he'd worked with, but the person he was choosing to become part of something larger than either of them individually. Yes, he said simply. I am. Then, Elder Vex said with what might have been satisfaction, let us see if this irregular bonding can become a proper union. The bonding ceremony took place in Nightfall Station's Arboretum, the only space large enough to accommodate both the Nix High ritual requirements and the human witnesses who had gathered to observe this unprecedented interspecies union. Ben stood in the center of a circle marked by bioluminescent crystals that Kale had brought from the Nix High homeworld, their soft glow creating an otherworldly atmosphere that seemed appropriate for what was essentially a transformation rather than a simple wedding. The bonding will fundamentally alter your physiology, Elder Vex explained as she prepared the ceremonial implements. Nix High share life force at the cellular level, which requires compatible energy patterns between mates. The ceremony creates this compatibility through guided psychic integration. Ben nodded, though he suspected that no amount of explanation could truly prepare him for what was about to happen. The past week had already shown him that Nix High culture operated on principles that human science was only beginning to understand. Sarah stood across from him in the circle, wearing ceremonial robes that seemed to be woven from captured starlight. Her transformation since the bonding began had been remarkable. Her luminescence had increased to the point where she seemed to glow from within, her already enhanced senses had sharpened to almost supernatural levels, and her protective instincts toward Ben had become so pronounced that she had difficulty allowing him out of her sight. "Are you certain about this?" she asked quietly as Elder Vex began chanting in the ancient Nix-Hai language that predated their contact with other species. "Once the ceremony is complete, there will be no returning to your purely human existence." Ben reached across the circle to take her hands, feeling the familiar warmth spread through his chest at their contact. Over the past week, that sensation had become his anchor point, the one constant in a rapidly changing reality. "Sarah," he said, "the most honest thing I can tell you is that I don't think I was ever purely human to begin with. I've spent my entire career studying alien life forms because something in me has always been drawn to the idea of connection across species boundaries. This isn't changing who I am, it's revealing who I've always been." The chanting reached a crescendo, and Ben felt something shift in the space around them, as if reality itself was becoming more malleable. The bioluminescent crystals began to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, and he could sense Sarah's presence not just physically but as a warm glow in his consciousness. "The integration begins," Elder Vex announced. "Dr. Harper, you must open your mind completely to Sarah's psychic presence. Any resistance will cause the process to fail and potentially damage both participants." Ben had expected the mental connection to feel invasive or overwhelming, but instead it felt like coming home. Sarah's consciousness touched his with the gentleness of someone who had been waiting a lifetime for this level of intimacy, and he found himself welcoming her presence in his mind with an eagerness that surprised him. Through their growing connection, Ben could feel Sarah's emotions as clearly as his own, her joy at their union, her wonder at experiencing human thought patterns, her deep satisfaction at finally having someone who could understand her completely. But he could also sense something else, her memories. Images flashed through their shared consciousness, Sarah as a young Nix-Hai, training in the clan disciplines, her first encounters with human culture and her fascination with human scientific methods, her months of watching Ben work and gradually developing feelings she thought could never be reciprocated. Most powerfully, he experienced her perspective of their first meeting, seeing himself through her enhanced senses and understanding for the first time how his unconscious behaviors had already been creating bonds he was unaware of. "The physiological changes are beginning," Elder Vex observed with clinical interest. "Dr. Harper, you should feel enhanced sensory perception and increased physical capabilities." Ben realized she was right. Colors had become more vivid, sounds more distinct, and he could sense the bioelectric fields of everyone in the arboretum. His strength had increased noticeably, and his reflexes felt quickened to the point where he could track the motion of individual dust motes floating in the air. But the most profound change was emotional. The protective instincts he'd been developing toward Sarah had crystallized into something absolute. He would defend her against any threat, support her in any endeavor, and prioritize her well-being above his own survival. The sensation was overwhelming but not unwelcome, like discovering a capacity for love that he hadn't known he possessed. "And the final integration," Elder Vex said as the bioluminescent crystals reached peak brightness. "The sharing of life force that completes the bond." What happened next transcended Ben's ability to describe in human terms. He felt his life energy merge with Sarah's, creating a connection that existed at the level of fundamental existence. They were still distinct individuals, but they were also part of something larger, a combined consciousness that drew strength from both human adaptability and Nix-Hai intensity. When the ceremony concluded and the crystals dimmed to their normal glow, Ben found himself fundamentally changed. His skin had taken on a subtle luminescence that would mark him as bonded to anyone familiar with Nix-Hai culture, his senses were enhanced to levels that made the world seem like a completely different place, and his connection to Sarah had become as essential as breathing. "How do you feel?" Dr. Park asked as the witnesses gathered around them. "Like myself, but more," Ben replied, surprised by how easily the words came. "Everything I was before is still here, but enhanced and expanded." Sarah smiled, her crimson eyes bright with shared joy. "The bond has stabilized perfectly." Ben retains his human perspective and creativity while gaining Nix-Hai sensory capabilities and enhanced physical attributes. Kale approached them with an expression that might have been approval. "Sister, you have chosen well." The human, Ben, has adapted to bonding more completely than many of our own people manage. Because he was already compatible, Sarah replied. His openness to alien perspectives, his scientific curiosity, his natural empathy, these traits made him an ideal mate for someone of our species. Dr. Park looked between them with the fascination of a researcher observing a successful experiment. Ben, what are your plans now? Will you be leaving the station? Ben and Sarah exchanged a look, their bonded consciousness allowing them to communicate in ways that required no words. Actually, Ben said, we'd like to continue our research here. The bonding has given us capabilities that neither humans nor Nix-Hi possess individually. We could pioneer entirely new approaches to xenobiological study. A hybrid research methodology, Sarah added. Combining human scientific rigor with Nix-Hi intuitive perception. The potential discoveries could revolutionize interspecies cooperation. Elder Vex nodded approvingly. A worthy use of your unique gifts. The Clan Council will be pleased to support research that benefits both species. As the ceremony concluded and the various witnesses began to disperse, Ben found himself alone with Sarah in the arboretum, surrounded by the soft glow of alien crystals and the quiet hum of station systems. The woman beside him was still recognizably the research partner he'd worked with for months, but she was also his mate in ways that transcended human understanding of partnership. Any regrets? Sarah asked, echoing the question he'd been asking himself. Ben considered the question seriously. He'd sacrificed his purely human existence, bound himself permanently to someone of an alien species, and committed to a relationship that would fundamentally alter every aspect of his future. In human terms, it was an enormous risk based on feelings he'd only recently acknowledged. The only thing I regret, Ben said, pulling Sarah closer and marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, is that it took a power failure and a badly timed joke to make me admit how I felt about you. Sarah's laughter was like music, enhanced by harmonics that his newly sensitive hearing could detect and appreciate. Perhaps it wasn't badly timed after all. The Nix-Hi believe that the universe creates opportunities for bonds that are meant to exist. Your subconscious may have been more aware of our compatibility than your conscious mind. So you're saying the universe wanted us together? I'm saying that love finds a way to express itself, even when we try to disguise it as humor. Sarah's crimson eyes sparkled with mischief. Though perhaps in the future, when you want to tell me you love me, you could try being intentional about it. Ben grinned, feeling the bond between them pulse with shared amusement and deeper emotions. I love you, Sarah. Intentionally, completely, and permanently. Then I am yours, she replied, and you are mine. As it should be. 3 months later, Ben stood in the same arboretum where their bonding ceremony had taken place, but now it had been converted into a research laboratory that represented the cutting edge of interspecies scientific cooperation. Their hybrid methodology had already produced discoveries that neither human nor Nix-Hi researchers could have achieved alone, and their work was attracting attention from xenobiologists across the galaxy. The symbiotic organisms in Sector 7 are responding to our combined bioelectric fields in ways that suggest they're actually designed for interspecies interaction, Sarah reported, her enhanced senses allowing her to detect patterns that even their most sophisticated instruments missed. Which supports your theory about the planet being a natural meeting point for different forms of consciousness, Ben added, his human analytical skills complementing her intuitive perceptions. The ecosystem isn't just nocturnal. It's designed to bring different species together. Their research had revealed that Nightfall Station's planet was apparently a natural laboratory for interspecies bonding, with native organisms that seemed to facilitate psychic connections between different forms of life. It was, Ben realized, the perfect place for a relationship that existed at the intersection of different ways of being conscious. Dr. Park wants to expand the program, Sarah said, settling beside Ben on the observation platform they built overlooking their research area. She's requesting funding for a permanent interspecies cooperation facility. And how do you feel about being the poster couple for human Nix-Hi relations? Ben asked. Sarah smiled, her luminescence reflecting the soft glow of the bioluminescent organisms they studied. I feel like we've proven that some jokes are worth taking seriously." Ben laughed, remembering the moment of panic when his casual declaration had triggered something he didn't understand. Now, feeling the constant warmth of their bond and a shared consciousness that made them stronger together than either could be alone, he understood that some mistakes were actually destiny wearing a disguise. "I love you," he said again, still marveling at how 3 simple words had changed everything. "Then you're mine," Sarah replied, completing the ritual exchange that had become their private celebration of choosing each other across the vast differences between species, cultures, and ways of understanding existence itself. And in the soft darkness of Nightfall Station, surrounded by organisms that thrived on connection and cooperation, they continued the work of proving that love could transcend any boundary when 2 people were brave enough to mean what they said, even when they said it as a joke.